Chapter 1. Chapter 1. Clotilde found the thing by accident, which was how most consequential objects entered her life quietly, without ceremony, while she was looking for something else entirely. The abandoned storage room sat beneath the convent like a held breath, a place no one remembered to lock because no one remembered it existed. The air inside was cool and faintly sweet, smelling of old poultry feed, rheumatism ointment, dust, and a ghost of slime that clung to the concrete floor like a Nickelodeon afterimage from childhood. Light from a single bulb bounced oddly off a wall of stacked mirrors, hand mirrors, vanity mirrors. One warped thing shaped vaguely like a wigwam that reflected Clotilde back at herself in a dozen unflattering moral angles. And there, half hidden behind a crate stamped Prague in flaking ink, sat the object. Small, pulsing faintly, translucent and greenish, as if someone had taken a memory of slime and taught it how to breathe. It wasn't Gunnar, exactly not like before. This thing had structure, faint symbols inside it that rearranged themselves when Clotilde leaned closer. Her own eyes reflected back at her until she startled at how cat-colored they looked in that light, bright and untrustworthy.
She crossed herself without thinking.
Somewhere above, the Rio Grande flowed indifferent and far away in her mind, a remembered geography lesson she could not place, while behind her a crack pipe fell from a shelf she hadn't touched and shattered cleanly in two, as if to make a point. A love letter, handwritten, intimate, decades-old, slid out of a folder and landed face up at her feet, addressed to no one she recognized, signed only with a looped initial that trembled with longing. That was when the mirrors shivered. Not rattled, shivered. And in the deepest one, the secret one that only sometimes worked, Scott appeared, full and gentle and glowing faintly like a saint rendered by someone with poor training but excellent intentions. He did not speak yet. He only nodded once, gravely, as if to say, yes, this matters, and yes, it has already begun. Before Clotilde could retreat or pray or do something sensible, Ralph's voice erupted from the hallway, echoing into the room with the theatrical commitment of a creature who had waited his entire life to be overheard, and he launched into a single, uninterrupted sermon that poured through the doorway like a flood. The frog that sits between water and land like it's undecided about reality, which frankly I respect because frogs have survived plagues, extinctions, children with nets and network television. And if that doesn't make them philosophers, I don't know what does. Frogs appear in fairy tales as princes and in laboratories as martyrs. And nobody ever asks how they feel about that. And then there's Kermit, who is not just a frog, but a moral compass in felt form, who taught an entire generation that it is not easy being green, which is true both chromatically and spiritually. Because green is envy and sickness and slime and rebirth all at once. And Kermit loved Miss Piggy despite her volatility, which tells us frogs believe in grace. And frogs sing, yes, they sing at night in choruses like tiny unbaptized monks. And if you listen closely, you realize they are keeping time for the world. And I think personally that if frogs ever stop singing, we are finished, completely finished. And that is why when I see slime, I do not panic, I listen.
The monologue ended on a soft, reverent click of his beat.
The room went still. The object on the floor twitched. One of the mirrors cracked straight down the middle, silently. And clotted heart pounding, understood with a clarity she did not enjoy that whatever this new small thing was, it was not a sequel, it was a footnote written by something with very sharp handwriting, and it had just noticed her. Chapter 2, Clotted chose Dorothea carefully, the way one chooses a lock to whisper a secret to. Dorothea had the right posture for secrecy, upright but soft around the edges, like someone who knew the weight of confession without needing to catalog it. They met in the small side room with the bad lamp and the good silence, the one that smelled faintly of old paper and lemon polish.
Clotted placed the object on the table between them, wrapped in a dish towel as if it might catch a chill.
When she uncovered it, Dorothea did not gasp.
She smiled the way Snow White might smile at Doc when he said something alarming but sincere.
The thing pulsed once, dimly, and the light made Dorothea's face look briefly like Dolphus Open, astonished, unguarded before settling back into something more like Grumpy's practiced skepticism.
Dorothea leaned in, whispering that it reminded her of a dream she once had about Prague. Mirrors multiplying themselves into whole rooms, people becoming more themselves and less themselves at the same time.
Clotilde confessed the storage room, the cracked pipe shattering like punctuation, Scott's face in the mirror. Dorothea crossed herself, then laughed once, sharp and brittle, like Happy laughing at the wrong moment because the alternative is screaming.
They spoke in fragments at first, circling the object like bashful at a dance, careful not to touch. Dorothea noticed symbols sliding beneath the surface and said the word astrology without meaning to, as if it had floated up from somewhere older than either of them.
She mentioned telephone poles and how they always look like they're holding the sky in place.
And Clotted thought of the sky cracking open just a little like before. Somewhere down the hall, jazzercise music thumped faintly from a radio someone had forgotten to turn off. A ridiculous soundtrack that made the moment wobble between sacred and absurd. The object responded to the rhythm, brightening, then dimming, and Dorothea murmured Sneezy's name when a sudden waft of paprika stung her nose for no reason at all.
It was then the surprising thing happened. The mirrors along the wall there shouldn't have been mirrors there briefly showed other rooms, other times. One flashed a garden party with tiki torches and a candelabra that seemed to float on its own authority.
Another showed a stagecoach rattling past a haberdasher's shop. Another showed nothing but bowling pins falling over and over like a prayer that kept getting answered. Gumbo did not know yet. He was elsewhere, hovering near consciousness like the cowardly lion practicing bravery in private. But the chapter insists on honesty, and honesty says he was already being tugged toward the truth. The object knew him.
Dorothea felt it. She said his name softly, the way Dorothy says Toto when the wind starts behaving badly. Clotted shook her head.
Not yet. They agreed on secrecy the way people agree on weather uneasily, aware it would change. Outside, Germain's day was collapsing without ceremony.
The devastation arrived quietly at first. A phone call that went wrong. A sentence that ended too early.
By evening, it was undeniable.
Germain lost something irreplaceable, not a thing, but a function. A capacitor like the Tin Man discovering rust in his joints where the oil can could no longer reach.
His hands shook.
His voice lost its reliable floor.
Later, they would name it, explain it, medicalize it into something manageable, but in that moment it was simply gone, and the absence howled.
He appeared midway through the chapter, like the wizard behind the curtain, unexpected, half-exposed, bringing news that rearranged the furniture of the room.
Cato had seen something similar once far from here, and said the words wicked witch under his breath as if invoking a weather system. He warned them that objects like this one do not stay small out of courtesy.
Dorothea bristled, Glinda Bright for a second insisting there were kinder forces at work, that not every strange thing arrived upon it.
The object flickered again, and in its surface Clottel saw a brief, impossible image. Gumbo awake, eyes open, staring directly back as if through water.
The radio cut out. The jazzercise beat died mid-step.
Somewhere a Hot Wheels car skittered across a tile floor and stopped by itself.
By the time Gumbo really knew it was too late to pretend he didn't. He felt it before anyone told him, a tug like a dream yanking at a loose thread. Dorothea went to him with careful words, but the truth leapt ahead of her like Toto pulling free of Dorothy's grip. Gumbo's face did not register fear first. Registered recognition? He said the object's glow felt familiar, like the first time disco hit the room and nobody had words yet, only movement. Outside, the wind picked up. Inside, the mirrors went dark all at once. Germaine screamed a raw sound, animal and brief, and then fell silent.
The object began to hum, louder now, symbols locking into place, and every light in the building blinked out together, as if someone had reached the end of a sentence and decided not to finish it.
Chapter 3, Loon always said the museum breathed differently at night, not asleep exactly, more like holding its breath between thoughts. Merrick humored this belief until the evening the two of them found themselves alone in the West Wing. The lights dimmed to preservation-level twilight, the air tasting faintly of dust and ozone. They had been inventorying minor work pottery shards, an unsigned landscape that refused to decide what century it belonged to when Loon noticed the mirrors. Not the obvious ones mounted for visitors, but the reflective skins embedded where glass had no business being. The vitrines, the polished stone floor, even the lacquered frames of paintings that had never been reflective before.
Merrick laughed it off at first, said it was the mind doing what minds do when
they've had too much coffee and not enough daylight. But then the humming started. It wasn't loud. It was intimate, like a whisper aimed directly at the bones. They followed the sound past the Roman coins and into the temporary exhibit room, the one housing the stolen paintings recently returned under circumstances everyone pretended not to examine too closely.
the troubling discovery announced itself without drama. Every painting with a disputed provenance was changing, not in subject but in depth. Loon leaned in and felt the pull, the gravity behind the canvas.
The brush strokes were no longer the final layer. There were symbols beneath them, faint and precise, matching the geometry Dorothea would later describe without knowing why.
Merrick reached out, then stopped because the glass of the frame was warm.
Not room warm.
Body warm.
The painting breathed back. In one piece, a pastoral scene, the river bent toward the viewer in a way rivers don't.
In another, a portrait's eyes had gone slightly wrong, reflecting a room that wasn't there.
Loon recognized the pattern then the way a librarian recognizes a handwriting style across centuries.
This isn't restoration, she said. It's alignment.
Merrick swallowed and noticed something worse. The museum security log, scrolling quietly on his tablet, was backdating itself.
Entries rearranged, timestamps softening, the night rewriting its own paperwork. The thing Claudel had found whatever maim it would eventually earn wasn't confined. It was resonating, pinging objects that had already learned how to hold secrets. They checked the archive drawers next. Labels peeled themselves free with a papery sigh. Inside, a crate marked miscellaneous contained a mirror no one remembered acquiring, its surface clouded like breath on cold glass. When Loon wiped it, the clouding returned immediately, forming a slow, deliberate spiral. For a moment just one the mirror showed Scott's outline, incomplete and hovering, mouth moving as if mid-advice. Merrick flinched. The hum deepened.
Somewhere far above them, a climate control unit kicked on and then off again, as if reconsidering.
The museum answered back in its own language. Alarms did not sound. Walls did not crack. Instead, every placard describing origin and date revised a single line. Context pending.
Loon felt the floor tilt, not physically, but narratively like a story admitting it had been told out of order.
Merrick understood the implication with a clarity that hurt. Whatever had been awakened was using the museum as a tuning fork.
Objects that had crossed borders, lied about themselves, or survived theft were now listening to something older than ownership.
They locked the room, knowing locks were a courtesy, and stood there in the half-light while the paintings continued their quiet, intimate work-opening depth, where there had only ever been surface until Loon said the only honest thing left to say. That this was no longer about artifacts, and that whatever was coming had already learned where to look. Chapter 4 by morning. The story had reached Cato before the facts did, which was how things always went when truth traveled on rumor's bicycle, and rumor had better legs.
She was standing in Sean's kitchen, holding a mug she hadn't filled, staring through the window as if the day might explain itself if she stared hard enough.
Sean was talking about errands, about nothing, about how the coffee grinder sounded like a small animal being punished, but his voice kept slipping sideways, bending around the thought neither of them wanted to touch yet. The museum, the mirrors, the way everything lately felt like it was lining up behind a door that had not agreed to open politely. Cato had felt it first the night before, a pressure behind the eyes and a tug in the gut, like when an elevator stops half a floor too low.
She said the paintings were thinking, which Sean dismissed until she described the warmth of the glass and the way the air seemed to leave. Sean stopped talking then.
He had learned through bitter practice when to stop talking. Somewhere in that quiet chaos texted from school one word, misspelled, all caps, weird.
Cato didn't answer.
She had begun to understand that whatever was happening did not care much for answers.
Professor Brigsby, to those who mistrusted him, Professor to those who feared paperwork was already awake and already lying.
He sat in his office surrounded by folders that pretended to be orderly, drafting emails he would never send.
The arrest record slept in a drawer like a snake pretending to be a belt.
He knew about the mirrors before anyone told him. He always did. Brigsby had spent a lifetime hovering near the edge of revelations, not touching them directly, like a man warming his hands over a fire he insisted he hadn't lit. When he heard about the museum's alignment, his mouth did the small, involuntary smile of someone whose theory had just blinked at him from behind glass. Chaos, meanwhile, was discovering that 13 is the age when the universe dares you to overreact. He'd shoved the kid who called him a liar about miracles, and the shove had become something else, mid-air momentum turning opinion into consequence. The hallway lights flickered. A locker door dented inward like soft clay. Chaos stood there afterwards, shaking, not scared of what he'd done so much as of how easy it had been.
He remembered Gumbo's voice about restraint, Dorothea's about responsibility, Scott's hovering advice about jokes being safer than lightning.
He swallowed it all and walked away, leaving a dent that would not quite agree to be ordinary again. Back at the house, Sean finally asked the question he'd been circling.
Cato answered without embellishment. The thing Clotilde found no one had named it yet, which felt important had a rhythm. It was pulling threads. People near it dreamed in color. Objects near it remembered being made.
Sean nodded like a man accepting a weather report he didn't like.
He thought of Brigsby, of institutions that explain themselves after the fact, of chaos at an age where power shows up before wisdom. He thought of the museum breathing.
Across town, Brigsby made a call and hung up without speaking.
Across the schoolyard, Chaos pressed his palms together until the tremor stopped. In the kitchen, Cato finally set the mug down and felt the counter hum back, faint but unmistakable. Somewhere between those moments, the mirrors at the museum, in the secret room, in places no one admitted to owning, caught the light just right and held it.
The chapter closed the way a held breath does, not with an exhale, but with the promise that one was coming, whether anyone was ready or not.
Chapter 5, the convent woke to the wrong kind of quiet, the kind that smells faintly like rancid milk left too long in a warm room, the kind that makes even the bells hesitate.
By mid-morning, the facts assembled themselves without ever quite agreeing to be a story.
An axe kept for chopping firewood missing from its hook, a door unlatched that was always latched, a sister found where she should not have been. No one described what they saw in detail. They spoke instead of circumstances, of angles and timing, of how a thing can happen without announcing itself until it's already finished.
Someone whispered about spatter on a wall that had once been yellow and cheerful. Someone else noticed broken rosary beads scattered like punctuation where a sentence had ended too abruptly.
A third person swore they saw movement where there should have been none. A lift in the air that felt like levitation but could just as easily have been shock playing tricks.
The arrest came quickly, almost eagerly, as if the town wanted to put a nipple on the bottle of chaos and feed it something simple.
A groundskeeper with a record and a temper was taken in, hands cuffed, eyes empty, the word jinx muttered by a bystander who liked explanations tidy. The case file looked neat enough. Proximity, opportunity, a wound that could be described without being seen. But neatness, as Chaos would later point out, is not the same thing as truth. Evidence kept pointing like a jack-in-the-box springing up where no one expected it, timestamps off by minutes. A poltergeist rumor that wouldn't stay rumor, maggots appearing where decay had not yet earned them. Chaos found the first crack by accident, which is how he found most important things. He was helping with the search, not because anyone asked, but because he couldn't sit still when the air felt electric. In a storage corridor behind the chapel, too close to where Clotilde had found the thing, too far from where anyone wanted to look, he noticed the light wobble, as if the walls were remembering another shape. He felt that familiar tug, the elevator stopping wrong, and then the thing pulsed.
Not loud. Not bright.
Just enough to nudge attention.
Chaos followed the nudge to a detail everyone else had stepped around. A smear that wasn't spatter. A mark that suggested a hostage moment someone held, then released when the official timeline insisted there was none.
When Chaos brought it to Dorothea, she listened without correcting him, which was her way of saying it mattered. The evidence re-examined began to tilt. The axe had been moved twice. The door had been unlatched and relatched. Someone else had been there. someone whose fingerprints didn't belong to the easy story?
The groundskeeper sat in a cell, bewildered, while the file grew heavier with questions. The convent's walls hummed like they wanted to confess.
By nightfall, the rumor of levitation had grown legs. The broken beads were gathered into a bowl that no one wanted to touch. The thing unnamed, patient rested where it had been found as if pleased. Chaos stood in the corridor again, feeling watched in the way mirrors watch you back. Somewhere nearby, something clicked, the sound of a jack-in-the-box winding tight.
The chapter ended there, with the click still echoing and the certainty that when it sprang, it wouldn't point where anyone expected.
Chapter 6. By the time the convent exhaled its last rumor of the axe, the truth had arranged itself like furniture after a bad party. Moved, scratched, but unmistakably placed. The groundskeeper was released with apologies that tasted like tea. The evidence chaos had tugged loose time, touch. The double handling of the axe clicked into coherence once Dorothea let it breathe.
The thing from the storage room wasn't a weapon or a witness in the usual sense. It was a catalyst, a tuning fork that made lies ring louder than facts. Once it hummed, the false story collapsed under its own eagerness.
That part at least was settled. The convent steadied. The beads were restrung. The walls stopped humming. Even the word poltergeist went back to being a joke you tell when you want to stop thinking.
Gumbo didn't get to enjoy the calm.
His instructions arrived folded into a voice message that sounded like it had been recorded while someone was walking briskly through a hallway lined with mirrors. Go to New York, go alone, do not bring Dorothea, Clotilde, Chaos, the parrot, or any ideas. Just you. Bring nothing that can talk back. He obeyed the letter because the letter had a way of biting. The reason given was thin follow-up, documentation, loose ends, but Gumbo knew the subtext. Whatever the thing was, whatever it tuned, someone wanted his particular frequency near it and everyone else far away.
New York met him like a held breath.
He did the meeting.
He signed the paper.
He ate a sandwich standing up because that's how the city prefers you to eat. Everything would have stayed procedural if not for the club. It wasn't on his itinerary, which made it unavoidable.
The address arrived as a text that looked like static until it didn't.
Inside the energy was a weather system, lights like ideas arriving too fast, bass that reorganized organs by enthusiasm alone.
Gumbo told himself he'd stand near the wall, observe, leave.
The floor had other plans. The sound didn't just move people, it recruited them.
His chest tightened, not with pain exactly, but with the memory of pain rehearsing.
He saw himself from above for a second, a man trying to keep time with a city that never learned to count. He didn't go to the hospital.
He came close enough to read the signage.
He learned where the exits were. A stranger pressed water into his hand and said kindly, "You're listening too hard." Gumbo laughed, sat, breathed, and let the night pass through him without permission.
When he left, the city had done something useful. It had shaken loose the last of the book's small confusions.
The club's pulse mirrored the thing's hum. The convent's rumors, the false arrest, the double-handled axe, none of it was random. It was feedback.
The thing didn't cause harm, it exposed resonance. People mistook that exposure for violence because exposure feels like an attack when you're attached to the dark. Back home, Dorothea closed the ledger on the axe case. Clotilde slept without dreaming of corridors. Chaos stopped feeling watched.
The book's knots loosen one by one the way a good argument does when it realizes it's been wrong.
All of it made sense now, or close enough to be kind. All of it except the instruction Gumbo found waiting on his phone when the plane landed. A single line, precise as a blade and twice as cold.
Do not bring the thing back. Gumbo stood at the gate with the city behind him and home ahead, the resolution warm in his hands and one unanswered command burning a hole straight through it.
He looked at his bag. He looked at the door. The but faithful kept on.
Chapter 7. Gumbo returned to the convent at dawn, the hour when even guilt is quiet, and found the grimness waiting politely. Not staged.
Not the other.
Just wrong in the way that makes the air feel heavier than gravity allows.
In the West Wing where storage rooms and old intentions go to sleep, someone had been there recently and not left the way they arrived. Doors unlocked that should have resisted.
A chair moved 6 inches, the kind of detail that tells you a human decision occurred.
On the floor lay a scatter of items that did not belong together, rosary missing its crucifix, a ledger page torn cleanly out, and the thing no longer humming softly the way it used to, but mute, as if holding its breath.
No blood.
No speck. Just absent, which is often worse.
Gumbo stood there long enough to feel the building watching him back, then wrapped the thing carefully like you do with something fragile that might also bite.
By noon, the city was panicking. Panic spreads faster when it thinks it's being rational. Rumors about the axe came back around, but this time the direction flipped. The person who'd been arrested was vindicated loudly and publicly, the kind of vindication that comes with apologies shouted through megaphones and a settlement whispered behind closed doors. That should have settled nerves. It didn't. Vindication arrived too late to be comforting and too early to be believed. People wanted a villain who stayed villain. They don't like it when the story learns a new grammar. Meanwhile, the bonsai garden began behaving like it had been listening. The first sign was scale. Miniatures rejecting their assignment. Leaves thickened, veins luminous, bark turning translucent in places where bark has no business being anything but stubborn. Then came the shapes. Gross that were not fruit and not flower, but suggestions, clear nodules with geometry that felt intentional. They pulsed faintly, not with light exactly, but with decision. Dorothea said it smelled like rain that had learned a secret. Clotilde said it sounded like teeth thinking. Chaos refused to go near it, which was saying something. They called Sister Supreme when the nodules began arranging themselves.
She arrived in a burst of fabric and authority, larger than the doorway and pleased about it, voice ringing like a bell that had seen things.
She didn't ask for context.
She stepped into the garden, planted her heels, and raised her hands the way you do when you're about to stop a fight with God as the referee.
Whatever she did, prayer, threat, negotiation, had only encouraged the garden. The nodules multiplied. The bonsai cracked their pots with enthusiasm. Roots reached upward, seeking air like it owed them money.
Sister Supreme laughed once, sharp and delighted, then stopped laughing entirely.
That's not possession,
she said, suddenly sober.
That's invitation.
The ground shuddered.
The nodules split, revealing nothing and everything at once. And somewhere inside the convent, something answered back. Chapter 8, the plan unraveled because of Herbert Pike, which annoyed everyone involved, including Herbert Pike. He was a footnote of a man, a former municipal archivist, with a limp, a fondness for index cards, and a memory that behaved like a steel trap with opinions. Herbert had been ignored so consistently that he learned to listen for what people assumed was silence. When the enemies who still refused to name themselves, a rookie mistake attempted to reroute the thing through an old utility corridor beneath the convent, Herbert noticed the paperwork didn't line up. Not the date. Not the signature. Not not the ink. He followed the trail the way some men follow birds, quietly and without asking permission. And by the time anyone realized the corridor had been sealed, the rerouting plan was foiled by 3 padlocks, a politely worded injunction, and Herbert standing there with a thermos, daring anyone to argue with municipal code.
Evil hates bureaucracy.
It gives up easily.
Relief barely had time to stretch before Drama arrived wearing Chaos's face and looking terrified.
The news came out sideways as most life-altering truths do. Chaos was going to be a father. He didn't say it like a confession, he said it like a math problem he couldn't solve.
He was still a kid himself, caught between belief systems and growth spurts, and now the future had shown up early, tapping its foot.
The convent reacted the way institutions do when surprised. Disappointment, concern, whispered prayers sharpened into judgments.
Everyone frowned.
Everyone except Sister Bernice. Sister Bernice had raised 3 nephews, buried a husband before she took vows, and once rebuilt a carburetor with a butter knife.
She took Chaos and his girlfriend under her wing with the calm authority of someone who knew that scolding never fed a baby.
She talked about responsibility without fear.
She talked about showing up.
She talked about love as a verb that required naps and patience and a sense of humor.
Chaos listened.
For the first time in days, he breathed. As if the universe needed symmetry, Anai, the magic horse, also turned out to be pregnant. No one knew how. Anai certainly wasn't explaining. She simply stood in the pasture, glowing faintly, chewing thoughtfully, destiny kicking gently from within.
Dorothea stared.
Gumbo laughed once, then sat down hard. Even Herbert Pike removed his hat. The convent held its breath. Plans were stopped. Futures were rearranged. And somewhere deep beneath the garden, something that had wanted control realized it had just been outmaneuvered by kindness, paperwork, and the inconvenient persistence of life. Chapter 9, Chaos's girlfriend was named Maribel Rios, though everyone at school called her Mary, like a word you say when you're trying not to cry in public. She came from the kind of family that held itself together with thrift store patience and loud love. The kind that watched the Jeffersons in reruns not for nostalgia, but because it reminded them that upward movement was possible even when the stairs were broken. Her mother worked double shifts and wore overalls like armor. Her grandfather had once been a haberdasher in a dying strip mall, measuring heads with reverence, believing a good hat could change a person's posture and therefore their fate.
Mary grew up absorbing the idea that survival was an art form, not a moral failing.
When the news of the pregnancy landed, it didn't explode. It sang. It sat with her through sleepless nights, through the sound of a neighbor's rooster and aggressive, dawn-obsessed, cock-announcing morning she wasn't ready for. She loved chaos, but love didn't magically turn into readiness. She was still becoming herself. The decision tore at her slowly, like a mantra gone wrong. Keep it, don't keep it, keep it, don't. She talked to Dorothea, who listened without staring. She talked to Gumbo, who spoke carefully, like every word mattered because it did. One male, one female, both present, not as judges, but as ballast. The day itself was quiet. No drama, no speech. Just a waiting room with bad lighting. A television murmuring about nothing important, and Mary staring at the floor pattern like it might reveal a message. Someone had scrawled REDRUM on the bathroom wall. A joke without humor. And beneath it, someone else had added a tiny drawing of a rooster, which made her almost laugh. Almost. The procedure happened off stage, respectfully unseen, because this was not a spectacle, it was a choice, heavy and precise, made by someone who knew her limits. Afterward, the world didn't end. That surprised her. The sun still existed. Cars still passed. Gumbo bought her a soda she didn't want but drank anyway.
Dorothea put a hand on her shoulder that said, "You are still here, and that matters." Grief lingered, but so did relief, and the two learned to coexist without tearing the place apart.
Back at the convent, chaos sat alone for a long time, not punished, not absolved, just changed. Something had ended and something else had been spared, and neither truth canceled the other. The chapter closed the way some days do. Somber, yes, but threaded with a thin, stubborn hope that refused to be extinguished, like a theme song playing softly in the background, promising that tomorrow might still find its footing and keep climbing. Chapter 10, the faces appeared the way mildew does first, a suggestion, a discoloration you could almost explain away if you were tired enough or devout enough or both. A cheekbone emerging from plaster.
A mouth where a nail hole used to be.
An eyelid forming along a crack that had been there since Eisenhower. The convent walls, which had always held their silence like a vow, began to look back.
At first, the only color followed.
Not paint, never paint, but a living saturation, like stained glass liquefied and poured behind the drywall. Blues that leaned toward sorrow. Reds that looked embarrassed to be seen. Dorothea noticed it during morning rounds and said nothing, because saying nothing is sometimes the first rule of survival.
Gumbo noticed it an hour later and immediately understood this was not a thing you told people about casually, like a leak or a mouse problem.
This was a thing that would get you committed, defunded, exercised, or all three in a bureaucratically inefficient order.
By afternoon, the mouths began to speak.
They did not shout. They did not chant. They spoke the way relatives do when they think you're asleep. Intimate, opinionated, occasionally cruel, occasionally tender. One wall-face told Claudio she had always been braver than she gave herself credit for. Another asked Gumbo why he still felt guilty about things that happened before some of the nuns were born. A third face, half-formed near the stairwell, laughed and said a joke that only made sense if you remembered a specific childhood humiliation involving a church pageant and a borrowed costume that didn't fit. The walls knew things. That was the problem.
The secret was decided on quickly and without a vote.
No outsiders?
No funnies.
No prayers said aloud.
The nuns were instructed gently, firmly to avert their eyes and treat the walls as they would treat any other forbidden curiosity.
Sister Bernice suggested curtains.
Someone else suggested denial.
Both were implemented.
Furniture was rearranged with the urgency of people hiding a body, though no one said that part out loud. When a face appeared behind the crucifix in the West Hall and whispered a sentence that rearranged Dorothea's understanding of time, she calmly moved the crucifix 6 inches to the left and pretended that solved it.
The faces did not seem offended by secrecy.
If anything, they approved.
One murmured, "Good. This stays ours."
Another said, "Walls remember better than people." A third asked for paprika for reasons no one could decipher.
At night, the colors deepened, pulsing faintly like a club you're too old to be in but can still hear from the parking lot.
Gumbo, trying to ground himself, pressed his ear to the plaster and heard not sound exactly, but intention. The building was thinking. By dawn, the rule was clear and unspoken. This could not leave the convent. Not yet. Not until they understood why the walls had found their voices, and why those voices sounded like the past, the future, and the most inconvenient parts of the present all braided together. Outside, the city went on unaware, sunlight innocent as ever. Inside, the convent learned how to keep a secret from reality itself, while the walls smiled, waited, and rehearsed what they would say next.
Chapter 11, the fallout began in the quietest of ways, as if the convent itself was exhaling after holding in a century's worth of secrets. Dorothy awoke to find the hallways dimmer, not because of sunlight, but because the faces had drawn some of the color from the walls into themselves, leaving ghostly outlines behind like watercolor sketches abandoned mid-stroke.
Gumbo noticed first that his wind chimes made from bones were vibrating on their own in the east wing, even though no breeze stirred. Each small clang sounded less like music and more like punctuation, as if the walls themselves were marking his guilt. Chaos 13 now, and not entirely trusting the conventional rules of reality, stood in front of a wall face that had formed a full profile of his mother, Cato, speaking words he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. His eyes, cat-colored in the late morning sun, widened as the wall whispered some truths only bloom in panic. He jumped back when the plaster shifted like breathing. He ran into the bonsai garden, now subtly larger than it had been yesterday, leaves brushing against one another as if murmuring among themselves.
Meanwhile, Cato returned from a walk with Sean, trying to ground herself in normality, but she could not ignore the soft, insistent hum of the building.
She felt it in her chest, a vibration that matched the pulse of the faces. Sean looked uneasy, glancing over his shoulder every few steps, muttering something about buildings having moods. Loon and Merrick, in town handling museum archives, were suddenly called to the convent on emergency. An unseen force had rearranged their records, moving historical specimens into impossible positions. Some were upside down, some floating slightly above the shelves. It was subtle, but to them unmistakable. Ralph, the parrot, now permanently unsettled by the voices in walls, had begun repeating fragments of what he overheard, piecing together nonsense sentences like Paprika, Stagecoach, Tarot, Mirrors, Kermit, you knew.
He flapped around the halls in a nervous frenzy, knocking over candelabra and scattering Hot Wheels across the marble tile. Dorothea tried to collect him, but he evaded capture like a feathery chaos agent, adding to the general tension.
In the meantime, the nuns were deeply unnerved.
Some muttered prayers to the Virgin Mary, others scribbled frantic notes in journals, unsure if they were recording divine truth or the wall's mischief.
Sister Clotilde tried to hold a meditation circle,
But the wall's faces, now more insistent, whispered over the chanting, hinting at secrets about each sister's past.
One mentioned a love letter that had never been sent. Another reminded a nun of a discarded crack pipe from a visitor decades ago. Every revelation was subtle, personal, and unsettling enough to ripple through the convent like a tiny tremor that threatened a bigger quake. Chaos tried to intervene when one of the faces seemed to form a grotesque, wriggling mouth near the dormitory. He raised his hands, and instinctively, the minor psychic ability he'd been hiding pulsed outward.
the wall mouth face froze, then blinked as if annoyed.
Dorothea caught his wrist, whispering, "Don't provoke it. We are guests here, not rulers." Chaos scowled, muttering about how everything always finds a way to get worse.
As the day wore on, the fallout worsened.
Mirrors throughout the convent now reflected faces that didn't belong to anyone in the room. Their expressions laughing, crying, and leering in rapid succession. Gumboldt tried to organize a meeting with Dorothea and Clotilde to decide how to handle it.
But every time he raised a point, the walls subtly shifted, rearranging doors or corridors just enough to disorient them.
It was chaos in a maze built of memory, plaster, and living color.
The chapter ended with the sound of a familiar low-pitched hum that signaled the presence of Scott in the secret mirror.
His eyes, round and unblinking, seemed to look directly at Dorothea through the opaque glass.
The hum deepened, and for a moment every face on every wall and reflection stilled.
Then a single clear sentence echoed in the convent halls. Tomorrow someone will vanish, and only the walls will remember who they were. Everyone froze, including Ralph mid-flap, as a sense of both dread and urgency settled over the building. Outside, the wind rustled the Rio Grande, whispering through the wiggling, strange bonsai, and inside, the convent waited, knowing that whatever came next would test them all in ways they could never have predicted.